Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestle News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there is a ton of news stories to get into today, and we have to start off, of course, talking about NXT, because the news came out yesterday, didn't it, when it comes to this NXT revamp. We've been hearing a lot about NXT, the revamp. Nick Khan opened up about it when he spoke to Ariel Helwani of BT Sport a couple of weekends ago on the weekend of SummerSlam, mentioned this big revamp that was coming to NXT. It had been rumored, he confirmed it, said it was going to be led by Triple H, Paul Levesque. We saw some teasers of it last week with the graphics you can see on the screen right there, the new logo, new music as well. Well, this whole revamp of NXT involving Paul Levesque doesn't look like it's going to be involving too much of Paul Levesque, because reportedly WWE Chairman Vince McMahon and Head of Creative Bruce Prichard are going to be producing the NXT brand with the revamp going forward. This is a big story. A lot of people talking about it last night. A lot of people upset about it last night when the news first started to come out. Now, WWE Chairman and CEO Vince McMahon and Senior Vice President and Executive Director Bruce Prichard are set to produce the NXT brand moving forward. Now, as has been previously noted here on the channel, NXT will return to airing live weekly television shows on the USA Network, beginning with the September 14th episode, which will feature the wedding of Dexter Lumis and Indy Hartwell. Now, this will mark a reset of sorts for the brand, with a new logo, new theme music, a new look for the weekly show, and a new reported creative direction for the show as well. And it was noted by Brian Alvarez yesterday on the Wrestling Observer Live radio show that McMahon and Prichard will be producing the weekly NXT television show when the brand returns to live television later this month. Furthermore, Dave Meltzer has also added that McMahon and Prichard will be behind the big decisions for the NXT brand, but not the smaller ones. So maybe it's kind of a case of day-to-day and the format of the shows, that will be where Triple H is running things, but on the big pictures and the big creative directions, and when it comes to the takeover specials and who's getting pushed, character changes and character development of sorts, that's where Vince McMahon and Bruce Prichard will be running the show when it comes to the NXT brand. They will also be responsible for the marketing, promotion, and direction of the NXT brand moving forward. Now, regarding the NXT creative, it was noted that Vince McMahon and Bruce Prichard may only be booking the wrestlers at the top of the brand as opposed to the ones coming through the door. Word is that NXT will be like the, quote, old NXT moving forward, which appears to be a reference to how the brand was at its peak around 2015 or 2018 or so. I will talk about that because I just really don't get that line. I saw that line was said on social media last night. I think that's nonsense. Now, Andrew Zarian of the McMahon podcast added that Vince McMahon has been hands-on with the NXT brand and will continue to be so moving forward. There's no word yet on what these changes will mean for Triple H and his team, which of course includes Shawn Michaels and Road Dogg, BG James, Brian James. But of course, once we get more news on that, we'll speak about that on the channel too. Now, WWE President and Chief Revenue Officer Nick Khan, of course, recently confirmed that there will be a complete revamp of the NXT brand coming soon. Of course, that was made during that aforementioned BT Sport interview with Ariel Helwani. Now, as I mentioned, there's been teasers when it comes to new logos, new music for the NXT brand moving forward. Now, we have some extra details about this whole Vince McMahon, Bruce Prichard being involved, specifically Vince McMahon, being involved in all of this as to what it's going to mean going forward. Now, in an update on the latest edition of the Wrestling Observer radio show, Dave Meltzer has noted also that Vince McMahon and Bruce Prichard will not be the executive producers, but will only handle, as I mentioned, the big picture aspects of NXT. The situation is a fluid one, with many in NXT not actually knowing the full situation right now, so things can always will change, which to me says that Meltzer and Alvarez aren't 100% sure on their sources on this one. They're giving themselves some wiggle room in case that actually turns out to be false. But Meltzer did know that this does mean a loss of power for Triple H moving forward as well. So when I heard this last night, immediately when this report came out last night, everyone started going RIP NXT, because NXT as we know it is dead. That is the facts of the situation now. NXT as we've known it in the past, NXT as we've known it as, you know, this underground, a third brand, kind of WWE's version of an independent promotion, that is dead. Triple H obviously markets and has promoted NXT in a certain way. And if you look at that program, it's very sort of inspired by kind of, you know, heavy metal, alternative. I mean, Triple H has marketed it as a third brand for several years at this point. But the way he's kind of described it in the past is that Monday Night Raw and SmackDown are mainstream pop music. NXT is heavy metal, alternative music. They also use the reference of Raw and SmackDown's like a Marvel film. It's like an Avengers movie or something like that, whereas NXT's Broadway and acting on stage. They've tried to say that it's a third brand, but it's an alternative third brand. That's not the case moving forward. It's going to be in line with Raw and SmackDown, and it's going to have Vince McMahon and Bruce Prichard overseeing things. Now, when it said in the report that it was going to be like the old NXT moving forward, like 2015, 2018, I laughed when I said that because I saw some people saying, well, that was NXT at its peak. NXT was great in 2015, 2018. So going back to that isn't a bad thing at all. Well, that part of the report is nonsense. Absolute nonsense, because between 2015 and 2018, which arguably NXT maybe was at its peak, I'd argue 2014 should be thrown in there as well. Either way, NXT during that period of time was being marketed as a third brand and still an alternative to Raw and SmackDown. It was still being marketed as being on Broadway or being whatever. It was still marketed as a third brand, and the idea that they're going back to that is nonsense, because we know that they're not. We know that the philosophy and ethos and the vision for NXT has changed in terms of the talent they're bringing in. Back in 2015, 2018, they're signing the likes of, Samoa Joe. They're signing Kevin Owens. I mean, Sami Zayn and that came a little bit before, but again, those guys were bringing in. You're getting Eric Young coming in, James Storm showing up. All those guys, Asuka. You had Finn Balor as your champion, Shinsuke Nakamura as your champion. All those kind of guys are coming in there. So don't try and tell me that going forward they're going to move back to that, because we know they're not. Nick Khan said it himself in that interview of Ariel Helwani. He said, we're moving away from independent pro wrestlers. We're moving towards guys from a sporting background or a modeling background or a acting background, whatever it may be. That's what they're moving towards. They're moving towards the philosophy and ethos and vision of developmental from the mid-2000s, not 2015 to 2018. That's a load of nonsense. That's an absolute load of nonsense. And I saw some people on Twitter yesterday, on social media, trying to spin it like this might actually be a good thing for NXT. This might be a good thing if they're going back to 2015, 2018. Do me a favor. Do me a favor. They're not going back to 2015, 2018. They're going back, as I mentioned, to mid-2000s. They're going back to FCW. That's what they're going back to. They're going back to FCW. Will they stop completely hiring independent wrestlers? No. But it's going to be few and far between. Again, we know what they're looking for now. Now, the only positive out of all of this, and there aren't many, there really aren't many, but the only positive out of all of this is that hopefully if you do get emotionally invested into a character in the new version of NXT, it won't change too much between the NXT on USA to Raw and SmackDown, because I would guess, you would hope, right, if Vince McMahon and Bruce Prichard are creating these characters in NXT, then there's no need to change them once they get to Raw and SmackDown, right? Because that's their vision from the first place. Part of the biggest problem with NXT for years and years and years, and I guess why some of these superstars have been failing, but certainly being changed once they get to the main roster, is because Vince McMahon and Bruce Prichard haven't touched them before. They haven't built them in their image. Once they get to the main roster, oh, that's the Triple H image. That's the NXT version of this character. Karrion Kross, right? Karrion Kross on the main roster is already completely different to Karrion Kross in NXT. Why? Because Karrion Kross in NXT is Triple H's vision of Karrion Kross, not Vince McMahon's vision. Vince McMahon's vision of Karrion Kross is wearing a stupid gladiator mask and suspenders and a weird skirt thing. Same with Keith Lee. Keith Lee version of NXT is completely different. He wears trunks and he's super athletic and he does things that big men shouldn't be capable of. On the main roster, no, you have to wear a shirt, you have to wear a singlet, you have to come out in this silly skirt, and you have to, it's all of these different things. The only positive of this is that maybe these visions are going to be a bit more in line with each other, so that if you do get invested in a character, they're not going to change that much, and maybe the transition between the NXT brand and the main roster is a bit more seamless. But the issue with that is the transition is smoother because the creative quality just gets eradicated down to what we're seeing every Monday and Friday night anyway, which isn't that great. Nobody is asking. I tell you what, I wish NXT was more like Monday Night Raw. Nobody has ever said that in the history of pro wrestling. Nobody has said that. The reason NXT was initially so popular was because it was an alternative and something different. Part of the problem with NXT since its move to the USA Network is that it's become more similar to Raw and SmackDown. They've changed their format. They've lost their identity. They've lost what made them special. That's part of the problem. So given that Vince McMahon and Bruce Prichard are going to be now producing NXT, It just means it's going to be more of the same. More of the same that we see on Monday nights, more of the same that we see on Friday nights. The only positive is that the brand will be more aligned to what Vince McMahon and Bruce Prichard want to see. The issue is that what Vince McMahon and Bruce Prichard want to see isn't necessarily what a lot of people outside of WWE want to see. That's the problem. But NXT as we know it is gone. It's dead. And to be honest, this isn't as much of a surprise because let's face it, if you've watched NXT for the last 18 months, you know that anyway. And I've mentioned this before, I do try to see both sides of the argument, and I do understand that maybe Vince McMahon and Bruce Prichard look at this and go, well, it's not exactly working anyway, to be honest with you. It lost to AEW. Fact of the matter, it lost. And that doesn't sit well with Vince McMahon. We know he doesn't like to lose. He will say publicly, we weren't ever in competition with AEW. We didn't even know they were on Wednesday nights. AE what? I've never heard of them. Tony who? Chris who? Never heard of them. I don't know what you're on about. CM who? They're not competition to us. We're people like Marvel are competition to us. That's pro wrestling. We're sports entertainment. But deep down, Vince McMahon knows he lost. NXT lost to AEW. In his mind, he probably thinks, well, I didn't lose. Triple H lost. If it was me on Wednesday nights, I wouldn't lose, pal, because I don't lose to anybody. I beat Ted Turner, I beat the federal government, I did this, I did that. So I didn't lose to anyone. That's why we need to change things. We're going to make this NXT brand a success. And you kind of know, for years and years and years, we heard about Vince McMahon isn't involved in NXT, Vince McMahon isn't involved, blah, blah, blah. But the moment they went to the USA Network, to be honest with you, it was a matter of time. It was a matter of time. You don't have a WWE product on cable television, especially when it's not totally succeeding. You don't have a product that has got a WWE branding on it on cable television that Vince McMahon won't eventually go, I need to touch that. I need to be involved in that. It's my company. I do what I want. I can fix things. The issue is that was there really anything necessarily to be fixed? The answer probably would be no. You know, it's more of a subtle tweak thing, but NXT as we know it is dead. It's over. Initially, it might not feel like that on that first show back on September 14, but if Vince McMahon and Bruce Prichard are going to be producing this going forward, it's going to be way, way, way more different than just a new logo and a new theme song and maybe a new performance center or whatever. It's going to be very different going forward. So time will tell what that looks like. But if you liked NXT in the past, I'm just going to be fascinated to see what it looks like in terms of the viewership going forward. Because for better or for worse, NXT has its fans on Tuesday nights and previously on Wednesday nights. It's an older demographic, a much older demographic. They never did that well in the 18 to 49 demo. They always did well in the 50 plus demo. They're hardcore fans. They're loyal fans. And are they going to be happy with Vince McMahon and Bruce Prichard changing things? I don't even think Bruce Prichard and Vince McMahon care about those fans, to be honest with you. If they can raise the 18 to 49 demo, and even if the viewership went down, but they could raise the 18 to 49 demo, that's all they care about because that's where the money is. So it's a fascinating story, but, you know, RIP NXT, because NXT as we know it is over. It is absolutely dead. Now, let's move on and talk about WrestleMania 38. I know you're going to be saying, oh, it was only just SummerSlam a couple of weeks ago. Why are you talking about WrestleMania next year? Well, we're talking about WrestleMania next year because we've got some updates as to the plans for WrestleMania next year in Texas, because reportedly, and this is some good news after the NXT news, reportedly WWE WrestleMania 38 will be a 2-night event. As noted earlier this year, WWE announced WrestleMania 38 for Sunday, April 3rd, 2022 from AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas. They also announced WrestleMania 39 for Sunday, April 2nd, 2023 from SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, California. But in an update, this is according to Fightful Select, the working plan internally as of last week was for WrestleMania 38 to be a 2-night event, as WrestleMania 36 and WrestleMania 37 were. Now, the current plan is for WrestleMania 38 to take place on Saturday, April 2nd and Sunday, April 3rd, depending, of course, on how things go with the current COVID-19 pandemic. This would be the first 2-night WrestleMania event to be held in front of a full crowd, again, dependent on what is going on with the pandemic in April of next year. Now, it was noted that the reception from the WWE roster to another 2-night WrestleMania event has been unanimously positive. Now, of course, nothing is official until WWE announces it, but many people within WWE have been notified of the plans for a 2-night WrestleMania 38 event. This is obviously the right move going forward for a variety of reasons. One, from a financial point of view of WWE, why wouldn't they want to jump all over this? If you can hold 2 WrestleMania events, basically, it's twice the money. So it's twice the revenue. So of course they would want to do that. And ultimately, that's why they're doing it, by the way. They're not doing it because the fans like it. They're not doing it because the roster likes it. They're not doing it because objectively it makes both shows better, because they're not 10 hours in length. The reason they're doing this is because Nick Khan and Vince McMahon and all of those minions that sit around that big table in Titan Tower, they look at it and go, well, if we can do 2 WrestleMania events back to back, of course we'd make more money. So that's ultimately why they're doing it. It's got nothing to do with critical praise. It's got something to do with that bottom line. Ultimately, though, the finances match the critical acclaim here, because those like WrestleMania events from, I want to say really sort of WrestleMania 32 onwards, to be honest with you, were so just difficult to watch. And like WrestleMania 33 wasn't necessarily a super bad WrestleMania. It was all right, in my opinion. The issue with all of them is that they were just so long, so long. They would start the pre-show at 5 p.m. Eastern time, and that would run until like midnight. We're talking like 7 hours, sometimes 1 in the morning, 8 hours. That last one-night WrestleMania, which was WrestleMania 35 in New Jersey, was ridiculously long. It was crazy. And by the time you got to the main event, we had a string of WrestleMania main events just being all right, but the crowd just hated it, or the crowd were booing because the crowd was tired. They'd been there for so long. And it's not just getting inside the stadium and waiting 7 or 8 hours to that main event. It's also standing outside the stadium and the whole events that's been going on that week. By that point, they were just tapped out. And as a viewer, I'd be watching it and I'm tapped out, especially when I'm over here in the UK and it's getting to like 5, 6 a.m. in the morning. They're just getting to the main event. So absolutely, this is the right move going forward. And look, I know that New Japan have done it for the last few years as well. I'm happy that the pandemic kind of forced their hand to adopt this model, but I think WWE have ultimately realized, look, I was going to say the roster is so big. It's not now, but the 2-night method is the way to going forward, because it keeps the shows at like 4 hours a night, which is palatable for these big WrestleMania shows. It gives the talent the spotlight they need and they deserve, and it gets more people onto the card as well. So I'm very happy to see that WrestleMania will be a 2-night event seemingly going forward. Speaking of NXT, some positive news when it comes to the NXT ratings this week, because NXT viewership is up for the post-Takeover 36 episode last week. Now, Tuesday's taped edition of NXT drew 717,000 viewers on the USA Network. This is according to Nielsen via Showbuzz Daily. This is up nearly 5% from last week's taped post-Takeover 36 episode, which drew 685,000 viewers. But Tuesday's NXT drew a 0.17 rating in the key 18 to 49 demographic. Now, this is up over 6% from last week's 0.16, but it's still very low. It's still very low in comparison to other shows like an AEW Dynamite or even Raw and SmackDown, of course, that just have that huge 18 to 49 demo. Now, NXT ranked number 23 on the cable top 150 this week. It was up from last week's number 27 rating. It also ranked number 55 in terms of viewership on cable this week. That was also up from last week's 62 ranking. So to be honest with you, they'll be happy, I guess, with that. The NXT viewership is still down, though, 16% from the episode that aired 1 year ago, whilst the 18 to 49 key demo was down 29% from the show that aired 1 year ago. That, of course, went head-to-head with AEW Dynamite in the Wednesday night time slot. I mentioned before, when it comes to the NXT ratings on Tuesday, I don't actually think people assumed that AEW Dynamite was hurting NXT, but in reality it probably wasn't. NXT was hurting Dynamite because it was taking viewers away. Dynamite was still winning, but it was taking viewers away. In reality, just having 2 pro wrestling programs in one night, when people didn't like what they saw when it came to Dynamite, they switched over to NXT, which helped them. When NXT doesn't have competition, they're actually going down because people are just like, I'm not going to go out my way to watch that show. Now, it is up. Why? I don't know. Maybe less competition that night. I don't know. Usually for tape shows, you would see it go down, but I guess that's good news for NXT. Again, I'm just fascinated on what it's going to look like in this new era of NXT that we're going to see in a couple of weeks, especially when it comes to the key demo rating and the viewership rating as well. An interesting story here talking about WWE Japan, because reportedly WWE Japan is no more. According to GameBiz, WWE Japan has been dissolved. A government bulletin was posted where it was revealed that investors agreed to the dissolution. Now, WWE was scheduled for live events in Japan in July, but those events, of course, were cancelled due to the pandemic. Now, this is what it said from GameBiz, quote, "It turns out that WWE Japan GK has been dissolved. Yesterday, September 1st, all of the employees, meaning investors, agreed. It was revealed in the, quote, public notice of dissolution published in the government bulletin dated today," which of course is September 2nd. It is a Japanese corporation established by the American professional wrestling organization WWE. It was running the Japan tournament, but the WWE Live Japan scheduled for July 2nd to 4 this year was cancelled. Now, WWE, of course, has not run a live event in Japan since June 2019. The company typically makes an annual trip to Japan, but the pandemic prevented travel in 2021 and 2020 previously. It's interesting because they did have offices there. We heard those reports earlier this year when it came to the budget cuts that wasn't exclusively just to talent. It was also corporate staff, and not just corporate staff in the United States, but around the world. We heard a massive corporate reorganization of all of the global offices, including the likes in the UK, the Middle East, Japan, Europe, etc. And I guess Japan's going to be part of this. It's interesting because Kairi Sane was working in the WWE Japan office as an ambassador. What that means for her going forward, I have no idea. It's just fascinating. We speak about NXT earlier on. It goes to show how much the pandemic and now the new corporate structure in WWE has changed things, because there were rumors about an NXT Japan a couple of years ago, right? WWE wanted to have their own territories around the world, whether it was NXT Japan, NXT Canada, of course, NXT UK, NXT Germany, or NXT Australia, all that kind of stuff. And now WWE Japan doesn't even exist anymore. So a really massive story on the face of it. I'm sure we'll find out more details about this going forward, but Nick Khan's all about cost cutting and saving that money to make more money, and I guess he's got rid of WWE Japan for that very reason. So that's certainly a big story. Finally, there was a report a couple of weeks ago that John Cena was going to be the next guest for Steve Austin's Broken Skull Sessions on the WWE Network, but that doesn't look to be happening now because the Broken Skull Sessions episode with John Cena will no longer air on Peacock and the WWE Network later this month. It was previously revealed that Hall of Famer Steve Austin would sit down with Cena for the next Broken Skull Sessions episode to air on Sunday, September 26th with the Extreme Rules pay-per-view. But in an update, the episode with Cena and Austin will no longer air on Extreme Rules Sunday, according to PW Insider. Instead, an episode with Austin interviewing Seth Rollins will premiere that day instead. There's no word on why Cena episode was next or if it will air at a later date. I don't even know if it's been filmed at this point. Maybe that's the case. It hasn't been filmed, or they're waiting for a bigger event, maybe Survivor Series or maybe Crown Jewel or something like that, which I guess might have more eyeballs on the product. I don't know. It sucks though. I was looking forward to that Cena episode, but if it's in the can, it means we'll get it. If not, it might be a scheduling issue. Nevertheless, we'll have to wait and see. But look, guys, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on all these WWE news stories we've spoken about today? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about WWE, AEW, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.